You know, there's technology out there that feels like it's been ripped right out of a spy thriller, except it's real, and it's being used right now. We're talking about incredibly powerful mercenary spyware, stuff that can turn any smartphone into a complete surveillance device. So today, let's pull back the curtain on how this whole secret world actually works.
Just let that sink in for a second. A message shows up on your phone. You don't tap it, you don't click a link, you might not even see it, but that's it. Game over. Your phone isn't yours anymore. How on earth is that even possible? Well, it all comes down to a really specific and honestly kind of terrifying piece of tech.
It's called zero-click spyware, and that zero is the key. See, we're all trained to not click on sketchy links, right? But this stuff doesn't need you to make a mistake. It's invisible. It finds these tiny hidden flaws in the software of apps we use every single day. Think iMessage or WhatsApp, and it gets in without you ever knowing. It's like having a ghost key that can silently unlock any digital door.
So, what does this silent takeover look like? Well, first comes the attack. That invisible piece of data hits your phone. Then, boom, the infection. The spyware installs itself and gets total control. And when I say total, I mean it. That's when the spying begins. It can read all your encrypted messages, listen in on your calls, literally see through your camera. It knows where you are, all in real time. And the final step? The cover-up. The spyware is designed to erase its own tracks, which makes it almost impossible to know you've been hacked. And believe me, this isn't just a theory. It's become a huge political reality.
So, let's start with our first big story. We're heading to Greece, where a spyware tool called Predator was used against politicians and journalists, sparking this massive political firestorm that went all the way to the top.
And you know, that comparison to Watergate, it's not hyperbole. When these kinds of powerful espionage tools are turned inwards, used by a government against its own political opponents, it just shatters the very idea of trust. This wasn't some random hack. This was a calculated political move, and the fallout has been felt far beyond Greece.
And you can really see how things just kept escalating. The scandal explodes in 2022. By 2023, the US steps in, putting the company that makes the spyware on a trade blacklist. Then in 2024, the big guns come out, full financial sanctions. And now, it's actually heading to court. A trial is opening in Athens, and the next big date to watch is September 24th. This is very much a live story, and that hearing could be a huge deal.
Okay, so from Greece, let's jump over to Spain, where things get even messier. Here we have not one, but two different spyware scandals happening at the same time, and trying to figure out who's actually responsible, well, it's proven to be almost impossible.
The whole situation in Spain is just incredibly complex. On one hand, you've got Catalangate, where dozens of people involved in the Catalan independence movement were targeted by the infamous Pegasus spyware. But then on the other hand, the personal phones of the country's own prime minister and defense minister were hacked by some completely unknown group using the exact same tool. You've got two totally different situations, but one very powerful weapon at the center of it all.
And this right here is the core of the problem. The Spanish courts have basically just thrown up their hands. They've said it is practically impossible to prove who hacked the prime minister. The spyware is just that good at covering its tracks, leaving investigators with these digital breadcrumbs that just lead nowhere. So, if you can't prove who did it, how do you even begin to stop it?
Well, that leads us to the next big question. If going after the user is a dead end, what about going after the makers? The strategy, led mostly by the US, is to try and bankrupt this whole secret industry by hitting these companies where it hurts, their wallets and their supply chains.
And the US has two main tools in its toolkit for this. First, there's the Commerce Department's Entity List. You can just think of that as a trade blacklist. If your company's on it, you can't buy US tech. No software, no computer chips, nothing. Then there's the really heavy hammer, Treasury Department sanctions. This cuts you off completely from the US financial system. Your assets are frozen and you can't do business. It makes it incredibly difficult to operate anywhere in the world.
And they haven't been shy about using them. Since 2021, at least 4 major spyware networks have been hit with these measures, including the big ones we've been talking about like NSO Group, the makers of Pegasus, and the whole Intellexa network behind Predator. The idea is to make this business model just too expensive and too difficult to continue. So that's the US approach. But what about Europe, where these scandals actually happened?
This brings us to Europe's big dilemma. You'd think, given that these huge scandals blew up inside member countries, that the European Union would be pushing for a total crackdown. But the reality? Well, it's a lot more complicated.
First things first, let's bust a pretty common myth. The EU has not banned its member states from using spyware. Nope. Despite all the outrage and all the investigations, there is no blanket ban on this kind of technology.
So what's really happening? Well, after a huge year-long investigation, a European Parliament committee came back with recommendations for control, not an outright ban. They're calling for things like needing a judge's sign-off before using spyware, or having to tell people after the fact if they were targeted. And this really gets at a central tension. The EU wants to protect digital rights, but national security is still up to each individual country, and frankly, a lot of them don't want to give up such a powerful tool.
And all of this leads to a final, really crucial idea. It's called the security paradox. For spyware to work, it has to exploit these secret, undiscovered bugs in our software. They're called 0 days. So governments and spyware companies, they find these flaws and they hoard them. They keep them secret so they can use them. But by not telling Apple or Google about them so they can be fixed, they leave those security holes open for anyone to find and use. Criminals, other countries, you name it.
So we're left with this really fundamental question. In the name of catching our enemies, are we actively supporting an industry that makes every single one of us less safe? It's a trade-off with no easy answers, and it forces us all to ask what security really even means anymore. And it's all happening right now, with the spy that could be in your pocket.